The annual Fall Festival was in full swing on the sprawling ranch outside Boise, Idaho, and I could feel the tension beneath the bright decorations and carefully arranged tables. At 57, I had taken it upon myself to organize every detail: catering, pumpkins, hay bales, lights. Close to $20,000 spent to make the event seamless. Years of tradition, years of doing what I thought family required, had brought me here again, yet a familiar unease settled in my chest. Guests arrived in clusters, laughing and greeting one another, the aroma of roasted meats and cider filling the crisp autumn air. My son, Ethan, now 33, lingered near the center of the crowd, his attention divided between family and the steady stream of notifications on his phone. He had always enjoyed the spotlight, a flair for drama and the kind of wit that cut deep when aimed at the wrong person. Then, as if on cue, he stood, glass in hand, and turned toward me. The words came, laced with that practiced condescension. Some people just try too hard to matter. The room seemed to pause. Eyes darted from Ethan to me. My parents, my siblings, cousins I hadn't seen in months, all fixated as though waiting for my reaction. My heart thumped loudly in my chest, yet my expression remained steady. I knew the eyes of the room were weighing on me, their judgment as palpable as the October chill, but I did not flinch. Instead, I allowed the words to hang, feeling the familiar sting of public humiliation sharpen my focus. This time, I would not be the easy target. I stepped back slightly, my mind already turning to what I could do next. The murmurs and shifting glances around the tables signaled the start of a turning point that I had been silently preparing for. I remained still, letting the laughter and chatter of the party wash over me, while my mind traced the long years that had led to this moment. Every glance from my parents, every approving nod toward Ethan, every subtle shrug from relatives who never asked how I was doing, everything accumulated into a quiet weight that pressed on my shoulders. I thought of the past decade the way I had covered his rent when his first apartment in Boise was too expensive. The countless piano lessons, sports fees, and weekend trips I had funded so he could maintain appearances. The holidays alone had cost me thousands in decorations and gifts for family members who never acknowledged my efforts. Each time I had swallowed my pride, saying yes when I wanted to say no. I had told myself it was what family required. It was what love demanded. And yet, here I was, standing in the middle of a room where every eye was on me. And the words I had endured silently for so long were delivered with cruel precision. For the first time in years, the sting felt different, sharper. Yes, but also awakening. I realized that my silence had been a shield, but now it could become a weapon if I chose carefully. I let my gaze wander across the tables, noting who was observing, who might intervene, who would likely cheer Ethan's antics. Calculations formed quietly in my mind, steps that would shift the balance without raising my voice. A subtle action, a single gesture, could change the course of this evening and finally demand recognition for the sacrifices I had made. As I adjusted the strap of my purse and took a slow breath, I felt the first flicker of resolve ignite inside me, a signal that it was time to act. Ethan leaned against the wooden railing, his phone in hand, grinning as he recounted his latest career milestone. "I hit 50,000 followers this week," he announced, voice loud enough for half the party to hear. "Brand deals are lining up. It's all about influence. People." Laughter followed from his friends scattered among the tables, while my parents nodded approvingly, their pride clearly aimed at the son they had always favored. I let the words wash over me, each one a reminder of the years I had spent funding the very lifestyle he now flaunted. The hundreds of dollars for classes, the apartment rent, the trips all invisible to those around him, all quietly carried by me. I had tolerated his braggadocio countless times, but tonight, something inside me had shifted. I shifted slightly, retrieving my phone from the folds of my purse. My fingers hovered over the screen, steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. I had prepared this moment carefully, setting up a notification through the family event app that would reveal the contributions I had quietly made over the years. A single tap could alter the room's perception in a way words never could. As I pressed the screen, my heart beat steadily, each second stretching as the notification moved through the system. Across the tables, conversation continued, oblivious to what was about to unfold. My parents laughed at one of Ethan's stories. His friends mimicked his gestures, and the energy in the air felt almost blissfully unaware. I leaned back, eyes following Ethan as he posed for a quick selfie, unaware that the first ripple of consequences had already begun. The notification was en route, and in just minutes, the balance of the room and the power dynamic I had endured for so long would begin to shift. The faint buzz of the phone in my hand was a small herald of the change that was about to come. Chapter 5: Shock and Silence. The faint vibration of Ethan's phone caught my attention first, a subtle prelude to the upheaval I had orchestrated. He glanced down at the screen, eyes widening as the words registered. His face drained of color, a sudden pallor overtaking the confident smirk he had worn moments before. Around the table, the chatter died abruptly, replaced by shifting murmurs and startled glances. I observed the reactions with quiet precision. My parents froze mid-gesture, their faces betraying confusion and disbelief. Cousins whispered to one another, unsure of what they were witnessing, while friends looked on curiously. The entire atmosphere of the party had shifted in a heartbeat, yet I remained composed, seated firmly with my hands folded in my lap. Eleanor, my eldest aunt, gave a subtle nod of approval from across the room, her eyes acknowledging the justice she had silently hoped would arrive. Frank, my brother, leaned slightly forward, lips pressed into a tight line, his expression unreadable but unmistakably supportive. Their small gestures were like lifelines in the middle of the storm, validating the quiet strategy I had executed. Ethan's panic was now tangible. He dropped his phone onto the table as if it had burned him, fumbling to comprehend the numbers and notifications scrolling across the screen. The room remained tense, with every pair of eyes tracking him, measuring his reactions against the unspoken truth I had revealed. For years, I had endured his arrogance and the family's complicity, but this moment recalibrated the balance. I felt the calm confidence settle over me, a stark contrast to the chaos spiraling around the tables. The weight of all those unacknowledged years of effort, the invisible labor, the countless sacrifices had been distilled into a single, undeniable fact. The air seemed to hold its breath as the initial shock reverberated through the crowd, leaving a silence that carried more weight than any words could. And as Ethan's gaze flicked nervously from face to face, I realized the moment of confrontation I had long anticipated was only just beginning. Ethan's voice cut through the stunned silence, sharp and incredulous. "Mom, what did you do? Why would you?" His words faltered as he struggled to comprehend the figures flashing across his phone, the totals representing years of unacknowledged support. My parents, equally stunned, exchanged tense glances, their confusion giving way to instinctive defensiveness. "Margaret," my father said, his tone strained but firm, "this isn't the time or place. We raised you to be responsible. You don't just—" He stopped mid-sentence, the words catching as the truth of the situation settled in. "I've been responsible," I replied evenly, letting my voice carry without raising it. I've kept the family afloat for decades, covering expenses for Ethan, for family gatherings, for everyone. But I'm done. I will no longer fund Ethan's lifestyle or any luxuries for this family. Everything you've relied on me to provide ends tonight. My mother's voice trembled, soft but insistent. You can't just throw this away. You know how much it all depends on... I know exactly how much it depends on me, I said, holding her gaze steadily. And that's precisely why I'm stopping. I am not your bank, and I am not Ethan's safety net anymore. Ethan's face twisted in disbelief, his usual arrogance faltering. But this is my life, my career, everything I've worked toward, for which you've relied on my work and my money, I countered. I've supported you so you could pursue your ambitions without consequence. No more. You're on your own now. The room seemed to hold its breath, every pair of eyes measuring the unflinching resolve in my expression. Even Frank's eyes were locked on me, approval and cautious pride mingling in his gaze. Eleanor shifted slightly, a silent affirmation of the justice that had finally been asserted. For the first time, the balance had shifted, and the power that had been quietly amassed over decades by me was visible, undeniable. The tension in the room was taut, every whispered speculation now overshadowed by the declaration I had made, and as Ethan struggled to find a response, grasping for words that wouldn't come, I felt the first true sense of control in years, knowing the next move would be theirs, but the choice to act had been mine. Later that evening, after the initial shock of the party had begun to settle, Cynthia asked me to come over to her home. Her expression was serious, her usual warmth replaced with a sharp focus that immediately put me on edge. As soon as we were seated, she didn't waste words. "Margaret," she said, her voice low and deliberate, "there's something you need to know about your parents." I braced myself, my stomach tightening. I had expected lingering tension, maybe some additional guilt trips about Ethan. But nothing prepared me for the truth Cynthia was about to reveal. "They sold the old family condo downtown years ago," she began. "They got $100,000 for it. In cash. They never told you or Ethan." I blinked, struggling to process the words. $100,000. My parents had always painted themselves as financially strapped, perpetually needing my contributions to keep everything afloat. Every payment I had made to support Ethan, every expense I had covered for the family, had been under the assumption that they truly needed me. And yet, they had hidden this money from me. They didn't want anyone to know. Cynthia continued. They invested it in some stocks, thinking it would grow, but it tanked. Almost all of it is gone now. They kept it secret because they didn't want to appear to have failed. The realization hit me like a physical blow. All those years of quietly sacrificing my savings, covering every expense, supporting a lifestyle for Ethan that was neither earned nor appreciated, had been unnecessary. I felt a surge of anger, raw and hot, but underneath it, there was a strange sense of validation. The frustration I had carried for decades suddenly made perfect sense. I thought of every holiday, every school fee, every family event I had funded, every ounce of patience and every dollar I had quietly provided had been based on a false narrative. The betrayal was staggering, but so was the clarity it brought. My actions at the party, the subtle assertion of control, were no longer just justified, they were necessary. Sitting there, absorbing the full weight of the revelation, I understood that nothing would ever be the same again, and the moment for real consequences had arrived. The next morning, I made the decisions that had been forming in my mind for weeks, the weight of years finally tipping the scales. I opened my banking app and systematically canceled every recurring payment: Ethan's apartment, his car insurance, the contributions I had made to his lifestyle, even the repairs on my parents' home and their supplemental insurance. It was methodical, deliberate, and final. By the afternoon, the ripple effects began. Ethan called repeatedly, his voice tight with panic. "Mom, what's happening? You can't just—" I let the calls go unanswered. The texts followed, urgent and increasingly desperate, detailing overdue bills and unpaid services. For years, he had lived without real accountability, and now the absence of my support forced him to confront it. My parents scrambled as well. Richard's pride was wounded, Lillian's worry palpable. They tried to explain, to plead, to frame the situation as a misunderstanding. But I had no patience for the excuses I had long endured. The financial and emotional safety net I had maintained for them all these years was gone, and they were left to navigate the consequences of their choices. Across the family gatherings and casual phone calls, the dynamics began to shift. Relatives who had quietly relied on me for guidance and resources now looked to one another instead. The power I had quietly held silent support. Invisible contributions was no longer assumed. I watched as the household balance adjusted, the familiar hierarchy disrupted by the reality I had long hinted at but never enforced. It was not revenge. It was consequence. Natural and unavoidable. I felt a curious calm as I reviewed the effects of my decisions. Years of silent labor, of unquestioned responsibility, had culminated in a moment of clarity. The family could no longer take me for granted, and Ethan could no longer navigate life without accountability. As the days progressed and the adjustments settled in, I began to sense the first traces of freedom, a space where my choices were no longer dictated by obligation, but by principle. The path forward would be different, and for the first time, entirely my own. With the immediate chaos of the financial cutoffs behind me, I began to focus on myself in a way I hadn't allowed for decades. For years, my budget had revolved around covering expenses for Ethan and maintaining a seamless family facade. Now, I could redirect that energy and those resources toward my own life. I reopened savings accounts I had neglected, set aside money for small indulgences, and even signed up for a weekend photography class I had long wanted to take. I booked a short trip to the mountains near Sun Valley, enjoying the crisp autumn air and the sense of independence that came with planning something solely for myself. I ran in the early mornings, feeling the strength in my legs and the clarity in my mind that came from movement, unburdened by obligation. Each small decision, each action undertaken purely for my own growth, reinforced a confidence I had nearly forgotten existed. My family attempted to reach out, texts and phone calls from Ethan, my parents, and even Cynthia, probing and testing the boundaries I had established. I responded only when necessary, and only with calm, firm words. I was no longer available as a financial buffer or a mediator for unresolved tensions. My availability now extended only as far as I chose. Even as the calls persisted, I felt a quiet empowerment settling in. The lessons of years of sacrifice crystallized into clarity. Independence does not require isolation, and love does not demand self-erasure. I could maintain relationships without relinquishing control over my own life. For the first time in decades, I felt the consequences of my own choices, aligning with my desires rather than with the expectations of others. The freedom to define my priorities created a foundation upon which the next chapter of my life could be built. The weeks following the financial cutoffs brought a profound shift in my life. For decades, my decisions had revolved around covering the needs and whims of Ethan and maintaining the illusion of a seamless family. Now, the space I had created for myself allowed me to rediscover priorities I had long neglected. I carefully reviewed my finances, allocating funds to rebuild savings and support personal projects I had postponed for years. I immersed myself in hobbies that had been set aside: photography, reading, and early morning runs through the quiet streets of Boise. Each choice, taken solely for my own fulfillment, reinforced the confidence I had nearly forgotten existed. Traveling to the mountains for a weekend retreat reminded me how liberating independence could feel, how self-reliance could coexist with caring for others without surrendering my own boundaries. Family outreach continued in various forms. Ethan texted, trying to negotiate his way back into my support, while my parents, hesitant and somewhat apologetic, tested the limits of my patience. Cynthia remained a measured presence, reminding me that some bridges could be rebuilt, but only under the conditions I set. I responded deliberately, maintaining firm boundaries without anger, understanding that consistency would teach lessons more enduring than confrontation. Through the silence that settled in my home, I reflected on what I had learned. Self-respect was not a luxury. It was the foundation of all meaningful relationships. Empowerment came not from exerting control over others, but from asserting control over my own life. Saying no, once fraught with guilt, became a necessary act of preservation, a principle that ensured my energy and resources were not continually expended for others at the expense of my own well-being. Observing the tentative adjustments in my family, I felt a quiet, moral victory. They were learning to navigate life without the safety net I had provided for decades. I had chosen autonomy, and with it came peace, clarity, and the knowledge that I was no longer defined by others' expectations. The future was mine to shape, anchored in the lessons of the past and the strength I had cultivated through years of quiet endurance.